My name is Amanda Pfeiffer. I'm an education coordinator at the Canadian Light Source. Welcome to another STEM seminar where we are going to be connecting internationally for this one with a teacher, Mirwat, who's a physics teacher from Islamabad. Before we begin though, I would like to acknowledge that the Canadian Light Source, which is in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, is located on Treaty 6 land in the traditional territories of the Nihilwak, Anishinaabe, Lakota, Dakota, Nakota nations, and the homeland of the Métis. And as educators, we respect Indigenous ways of knowing and oral traditions. And as we move forward with our various partnerships and relationships with students, teachers across Canada and internationally now, we would like to acknowledge that we are moving forward in a spirit of partnership, reconciliation, and collaboration. And we are thankful for the land that we are able to work on. I'd also like to acknowledge that the c.l.s. education programs are funded in part by NSERC's Promo Science grants, which have been allowed us to be able to offer workshops and seminars, as well as teacher PD, which is going to be shared in the seminar that you're about to hear. So with that, we're going to be joining in on a presentation that was delivered in an international teachers workshop in January 2022. This workshop was hosted in part by the LAMP organization, which is Light Sources for Africa, the Americas, Asia, Middle East, and the Pacific, as well as with the Sesame Synchrotron located in the country of Jordan. The Sesame stands for Synchrotron Light for Experimental Science and Applications in the Middle East. In this presentation, Mirwat, a physics teacher from Islamabad, shares her experience going through the c.l.s. Teachers Workshop, as well as her pathway towards bringing students and connecting them through our students on the Beamline program. We're really fortunate and excited that we had the opportunity to work with both international organizations as well as with Mirwat and her students. And we're excited to share her story. So with that, we will tune in.
Right. So, hello everyone. So as today marks, I guess, the last day of this immersive workshop, which was designed for high school teachers. And we hope that you all have a rewarding experience in the past 2 weeks. And so today I'll be sharing my experience on the scientific inquiry project that I carried out with my high school students, utilizing Canadian Light Source Synchrotron. And the topic of my talk is the story of a student-led research, including a social science survey and spectroscopy at a synchrotron. So this will be the order of my presentation. I will give a little background first on how I got interested in connecting my students to this scientific inquiry project and what approaches we pursue while constructing the scientific method of our project, skills and knowledge students have acquired during each step of this process, steps taken for planning and organization for smooth execution of the remote engagement, challenges that we have faced, and lastly, the students' reflection. Well, the story begins with my participation in remote virtual annual teachers workshop at Canadian Light Source sometime back in August 2020. In a way, a bit like this professional development workshop you have attended in the past 2 weeks. So after attending this annual teachers workshop, I got inspired to take scientific inquiry learning and teaching to my classroom. And there, I engaged my students to Light Source Student Experience, the program that Tracy just talked about yesterday. And coincidentally, I was teaching chapter Light when I introduced my students to this program. And during one of my classroom, I still remember that I introduced them to Synchrotron and its role and application in science, research, and development. And students who got later interested in knowing more about attended LISI program in December 2020. So during this 3-day program, almost 15 to 20 of my students have the opportunity to tour the facility. So as you can see, Tracy over here, ready to give us a virtual tour of the facility. Then the students were engaged with a Beamline scientist to investigate the soil samples, and they identified the elements present in the samples. They looked at the data shown by the Beamline scientists and got the flavor of that analysis by reading of the energy peaks and identifying the elements present in the samples. Also, they made the observations on the composition and the nature of the soil samples. And on third day, the students were then introduced to different careers, and they got the opportunity to hear from c.l.s. staff members about their research, roles, and the work they used to do in various capacities at c.l.s. So this experience has helped my students to know about the scientific environment, and they were inspired to take then careers in STEM. So that program was actually a change-making game for my students. Thus, after attending that LISI, a few of my students just got very interested in participating in the Student on Beamlines. However, just 7 of them became core team for this project, and we started on Feb last year with our remote fortnightly meetups with the c.l.s. staff as mentors throughout the project. And our mentors were Tracy Walker, Education Program Lead, and Dr. Robert Blythe, Science Project Manager at Canadian Light Source. So they held, guided, and facilitated the students to construct scientific knowledge. Well, in mentors capacity, they have provided the advice to enable students to make the decisions for their work, but they were not the ones who make decisions for them. So this approach has given students an opportunity to think with freedom to construct a scientific knowledge. And in terms of the learning outcomes, throughout this student-driven project, they learn to revise, reflect, construct their work, and in turns, this has uplifted their confidence to do the science. And I have actually seen building up student agency in my students while working on it. Then, as a first step, I had to submit an educational proposal, and these were the components that needs to be covered in the proposal: team description, outcome for the team, broad impact, and science topic. So I wrote the proposal outlining the team description in terms of differentiated skills, interests, perspectives they would offer to the project. So a little bit about my team. My team was a group of 7 girls, and they were from different grade levels, different educational system, taking different educational framework, national and international both. So it was a multidisciplinary group undertaking biology, engineering, and computer science subjects. Alongside, they have diversified interests. And these factors makes our team diverse as each member has something unique to offer to this project.
So, can I disturb you and ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
What was the grade levels? I mean, what was the age of the girls?
All right. So the age group varies from 15 to 18. I mean, because this is a mix of a group, some of them were in grade 11, and I have few students from grade 10 and few from grade 12. So 15 to 18 age bracket.
And they were all girls because you are at an all-girls school, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
I teach to all girls school.
So you don't dislike boys or anything?
No, not at all.
Okay.
But I like teaching girls and providing them with the different opportunities. So yeah. Because the girls are pretty much reluctant in doing, STEM confidently. So that's why I try to keep my focus squarely on the girls. But otherwise, as in extracurricular activities, I do involve boys too, as my volunteer work that I used to do in one of the orphanage schools. I did engage boys twice. So it's not like that I'm just wholly stick to the girls. But yes, my prime focus is on girls. Yeah.
I think in Pakistan, you don't have mixed gender schools. Yeah, in Iran, we just teach girls.
No, we do have, for example, in our public schools, we have, separate campuses for boys and girls, but we have in private schools, there are few private schools which run both. So they have a notice integration that this is a girl specific and this is a boy specific school for private ones. So, but in public, yes, we do have different campus for girls and boys.
Thank you.
Thank you for your questions. All right, so this was a little bit about my team description. And then once I have submitted my proposal got accepted and we officially received the beam time in August 2021. And then from there, the journey to construct a scientific method process continues. So in the spirit of a scientific method process, our first step towards the project was to identify or define a research question. So my team of 7 girls brainstormed 7 research questions, 1 from each member, ranging from environment, agriculture, health. Then in our first scheduled meetup with the c.l.s team, we had a discussion with them for project possibilities on each of the listed research questions. In the next steps, girls decided which could be the potential research question for their project. So me and my students set up a meeting over the weekend. During the meeting, girls just rolled out a few questions in the light of the discussion they had with the c.l.s mentors. And these questions were then narrowed down to 3 questions and further to 1 as our final research question. So the final research question was then further redefined and redefined, basically in the context of the technology and speed limitations that are present there with the samples and also the Canadian light source Synchrotron. So these are the learning outcomes or the skills that students have obtained while going through this process. They learn to re-examine, revise, review, reflect, and rethink. Well, this was our final research question. And my team also think of giving a provocative title to their research project. Though this part was done almost near to the time of finalizing the project presentation details, but they thought of giving a provocative title to their research project too. Then as a next step of the scientific method, students were engaged in doing literature review. And to have a knowledge capacity building and to enhance the scientific vocabulary, they did literature reviews of previously conducted research in the domain of their intended research question, which has helped them gain in-depth understanding and knowledge. They focused on similar research that has been previously conducted in specific similar research that has been previously conducted in specific, you can say specific to Pakistan, which gave them insight to the past work in this area. And well, going through the literature review, we found the global impact of the cosmetic industry. And they also got to know about the Minamata Convention, in which 28 countries in 2013 have joined hands to set a threshold to the permissible limit to the harmful mercury compounds in skin whitening products. And Pakistan is also one of the signatories among others in this Minamata Convention. So Minamata Convention has established a ban actually on manufacture and import of products that contain mercury beyond the threshold by 2020. And the other such research was conducted by the European Environmental Bureau back in 2018, in which Pakistan's Sustainable Development Policy Institute was a member. So going through the literature review, all this new knowledge was gained and attained by the students. So as a next step of the scientific method, we framed our hypothesis as this, that has Pakistan successfully limited mercury use in the skin lightening products, or are there any other hazardous metal of concern in these products? Well, we also incorporated a social dimension to our research by formulating a social survey. And the aim behind conducting the survey was to gather the data and monitor trends in Islamabad, population on usage of skin whitening products. So to compare the usage trends in different population groups depending upon their socioeconomic position in community. The other aim was to compare the trend frequency in relation to different factors, for example, the usage and spending trend, and the potential reasons behind the usage, including the societal pressure or the physical appearance, enhancing physical appearance. So to gather the data about this survey also aims to gather data about the awareness among the population about the harms caused by the skin lightening products. So conducting the survey has provided a quantitative orientation to our research study. Well, after deciding on conducting a social survey, in our fortnightly meetups with the c.l.s. staff, the students took turns to share and present their ideas and work they did in 2 weeks time frame. And they received the constructive feedback on their work from the c.l.s. mentors. As you can see in the box, they are communicating their ideas and then in turn receiving the feedback. So during one of our discussions on conducting the social survey with the mentors, we were advised to connect to one of the expert or researcher or social scientists in our home country in order to know in-depth knowledge of formulating and conducting a survey. So students contacted and collaborated with one of the researcher, and during the virtual meeting with her, they learned steps of formulating a good survey, considering ethical values, consent, confidentiality of respondents, and more. So decision of inclusion of social survey in our research process has helped us fulfill a broad impact section of the educational proposal, as we have also included a trans community in our research project. So what was the method that was adopted formulating this survey, considering the pandemic and lockdown scenarios? So we created the survey on a Google form and conducted as an online survey among the local population of Islamabad, while we make sure to involve the trans community. So we got in touch with a trans activist who helped circulate our survey into the trans community. And the survey form was then also translated into our mother language or Pakistan's national language, that is Urdu, for easy readability, as well as it was audio dubbed for the people who do not have formal education. So due to lockdown and pandemic situation, forms were circulated through social media to be able to reach to wider audience. So the responses that we received were good enough to do statistical analysis on the received data. So here is a glimpse of the data analysis done on a social survey. And what are the learning outcomes for my students? What skills and traits they have learned while going through this process of conducting a social science survey? So the students have learned to make survey in a Google Forms. They got acquaintance with digital tools while translating and audio of the survey. They learned about conduct of the survey and collection of the data through such forms. They learned about basic data analysis and visualization using Excel features like pivot tables, histogram, pie charts, which they were not familiar with before. On top, they learned about the ethical thinking. So considering the core ethical values, that is the privacy, confidentiality, data safeguarding of the respondent, and appropriate inclusion of questions, not to be sensitive to audience. So as the whole experiment was conducted remotely, and for preparing the sampling kit, including sample holders, kept on tape, and gloves were shipped to us from Canadian Light Source, along with the return paperwork. So while the samples and the other consumables for preparing the samples were arranged from in-country sources. So this being my first experience, and I learned dealing and handling with the international shipment while making sure that the samples must be reached at the Canadian Light Source well in time before we have had our beam time. So after receiving the package, the next crucial step was preparing the samples. And due to the challenges of a COVID scenario, considering lockdown, health issues, keeping in mind the SOP protocol, so decision on how and where to prepare the sample was a difficult decision. So finally, we decided on preparing the samples at my place, here in the same room where I'm sitting right now. So you can see in the picture that the 6 of my participants, they prepared the samples. However, the 7th participant was connected online as she was contracted with COVID. But that was a hard, actually, it was hard dealing with these issues because one of the students wasn't able to make it, but I really appreciate her enthusiasm that she stayed with us during almost it was a 4-hour-long activity, and she remained connected with us online. So I appreciate her for her enthusiasm. And then we did some pre-preparation practice. We cleaned the items, practicing wearing, taking off the gloves, holding kept on tape, and a few of the samples were prepared without any creams inside them, just to help students learn how to deal with all this apparatus, because everything was new to them. Handling kept on tape is not easy. How to place the sample holder inside the kept on tape. So we did some pre-preparation practice. And after that, girls prepared 20 samples very carefully in the light of the demonstration and instruction that was given to us by Tracy Walker and Dr. Robert Blythe. And girls then packed and labeled the samples, and they were then ready to be shipped back to Canada. So throughout this activity, students have learned about importance of considering the precautions. They have learned how to take care of the samples while in order not so that they don't get contaminated, and how to control the factors that could be of potential cause of contamination. So here is a picture. Sorry. Here are the pictures when our samples were received at the Canadian Light Source. So the samples were received in good condition with no damages. Well, on the safer end, the girls prepared 2 sets for each sample for redundancy. As maybe you would be able to see in these envelopes, we have 2 samples, 2 sets for each sample. And then we went for our scheduled beam time on August 14, 2021. So our beam time was a 4-hour-long remote session with 2 mentors and a Beamline scientist from the c.l.s. So during this process, students have to decide on steps how they would proceed with the experiment. Initially, the team planned to run XRF on all the samples as they figured out that switching between Beamline configuration to Zenes and XRF could be time-consuming and with the possibility of any uncertain event. So they may miss out investigation for their sample. So once the XRF was performed on all the samples, students went on taking decisions on samples with higher elemental concentration to conduct Zenes for speciation. And on one of our samples, differential Zenes data was also conducted. So what were the learning outcomes? So it was students' first ever experience of remotely utilizing the Synchrotron. They learned to work on real-time data and how to proceed with experimental work. And alongside, they learned the importance of taking notes and keeping a record of their work. They learned making collective decisions, keeping in mind the time limitations. So after receiving the beam time data, our next important step was to analyze and interpreted. So this is the data of our 10 samples that we sent to Canadian Light Source, and this is the XRF on all the samples, XRF data of all 10 samples. So this work actually requires extended hours and even late night meetings to interpret the data. So girls have worked dedicatedly for hours, and they watched the videos first, and which were sent to us by the c.l.s. as a resource pack that how to interpret the data and how to analyze the data. Then students learn to use Excel to plot waterfall graphs, and they interpret the data. After this practice and after watching these videos, they started working on their real data from Beamline. And while doing so, they listed down all the queries they have encountered during this work. And these were discussed during one of our scheduled meetups with the c.l.s. team. So the Beamline scientists were very forthcoming in answering all our queries. So these are a few more glimpses of our actual real-time data that we have received. So on one of our samples, this is a normalized data, and the other one is the differential one. So what are the learning outcomes for my students throughout this activity? So students have learned the basics of data analysis. They have learned to work on Excel for plotting of graphs and data visualization, and the literature review for Zane's data. Well, then, as a next step, to share their findings with the scientific community, they worked on preparing the presentation. The presentation was started on Google Slides so that each member can work in collaborative mode. Also, because the Google Slides gave each member the flexibility to work at her own pace and time. So as the girls initially finalized the main theme of the presentation, based on analysis that they had performed, that is the social survey and its finding, and the XRF and Zane's finding for the queens. So during the scheduled meetups with the c.l.s., the girls presented their work to them for feedback, and after iterations and rehearsals of the presentation, the team was ready for the final show on 17th of December, 2021. So what were the learning outcomes? What traits or skills my students have acquired after going or making this presentation? So they have learned to work collaboratively. They have learned to respect others' ideas and opinions. They've learned to build communication and presentation skills. And this has in turn enhanced their confidence. And they have learned to manage time, and they've synthesized the available information to construct a meaningful and relevant picture. So this is the actual presentation slide of the students who have presented or given the presentation almost a month ago. So what is a way forward? So the two important steps that we are looking forward to in the recent future are to present a poster of the topic of the project, and as well as writing and publishing a research paper. Well, as this entire experiential project was conducted in a remote setting, and also as an extracurricular project completely on voluntarily basis. So strong planning and organization was required to keep things on the right track. As a first step of the plan, we had our meetings with c.l.s. And for these meetups, the links were though generated and scheduled by the c.l.s. team, which were shared with me via an email, but I try to keep my students posted with these links and other information related to the project. So as the second part of the planning and organization, we have had our in-house meeting, means the meetups that I plan and schedule with my students for summing up discussions after meetings with the c.l.s. team. We used to share the ideas, we used to think on a way forward, planning, revision to the work, and setting deadlines for task completion. Usually for these meetings, the time varied between 1 hour to 1.5 hours, but at times extends even more. And these were set up either during the weekdays and over the weekends, depending upon the time students could spare. The next pivotal point of a planning was common working platform. So considering remote setting, I created a Google document where students can collectively take notes, brainstorm and communicate the ideas, set goals for themselves. And this document has served as the repository for our work from starting till end of the project. And also for quick and easy communication, I created a dedicated WhatsApp group for my students where we can easily and share our ideas or agendas or whatever. Then as the fourth step of the planning and organization, in context to the student agency, student had the freedom to take on the roles and responsibilities. For example, they scheduled in-house meetups themselves, take on assignments and tasks on volunteer basis. That is, they decide themselves on distribution of various tasks. Well, as the whole project was conducted remotely and conducting this extracurricular project, especially during pandemic, was itself a challenge. So we had to undertake this project on remote basis. And during this project, girls had to take their important exams and were available for working on the projects at varying time slots. And as different students belong to different educational framework, that is, few of them were taking national educational framework and few international, and both had different exam schedule. And as well as preparatory frameworks were different too. So we at times had to take a gap so the girls could undertake their exams undisturbed. And so there was a delay of 2.5 months as one group of students had to undertake their exams, and students' time had, at times students had some medical emergencies at home, as well as when someone among their family or themselves would fall prey of the COVID. So throughout the entire project, we had deliberated to keep each member on board so that switching of roles remained flawless. So here are my the reflections. The students are reflecting on their journey throughout the project, skills they have acquired, challenges they have faced, exposure and experience that they have gained throughout this project, working on this project. So as the students have shared that they have learned to tackle most of the problems that they encountered during an extensive research project. In addition, being given the chance to plan and execute everything on their own. So basically, this project has given all of my students the liberty and the freedom to construct a scientific knowledge. And they have gained all those 21st century skills that we wish or want to see in our learners. And starting from critical thinking, creativity, communication, collaboration, data, and digital literacy. So this Students on Beamline project has to offer all these components of the 21st century skills. So these are my students' reflections, and each one has something to say in terms of the scientific knowledge, the freedom that they have gained after participating in this project. And they have also built upon some new vocabulary like XRF, ZANES, and how the synchrotron can be utilized in different fields of science. And that is all. So thank you.
All right, so we're joined here with Mirwat, and we just had a couple follow-up questions for you based on your presentation, just wanting to hear a bit more about your teaching perspective. So first question for you, what did you learn from your experience with students on the Beamline? In your presentation, you talked a lot about your students and the outcomes they achieved, but what did you learn? How did you feel the experience went for you?
Right. So basically, students on the Beamlines has provided me with a multidimensional experience. So first of all, I would like to talk in terms of the pedagogy, and SOT-B experience has helped me pave the way from traditional to progressive and inquiry-based teaching. I have gained an exposure of providing an informal science teaching outside the classroom environment, in contrast to formal settings where students are limited from thinking outside the box, doing authentic science and exploring their own skills and abilities. In the traditional settings, students lack exposure to situations that scientists encounter in the real world. So SOT-B has assisted me in developing science identity among my girl team, allowing them to see themselves as a science person. And it has aided me in the development of a student's agency as a self-assured stakeholders in their own learning. And if I see this experience in terms of my professional development, as a mandatory prerequisite for engaging me and my students in SOT-B experience, I was given the opportunity to attend c.l.s. annual teachers workshop in 2020. And I learned about synchrotron science and its practical applications to the world around us, as well as the curriculum's connection to the science, specifically physics. In addition, as a result of my participation, I was recently granted the opportunity to speak at an international SASME teachers workshop in January 2022. About the research story of my pupils who used Canada's brightest light source, Synchrotron. And in case you were wondering, SASME stands for Synchrotron Light for Experimental Science and Applications in the Middle East. So this experience has overall allowed me to network, connect, and collaborate with other instructors, as well as local and international scientists and mentors. So during this journey, I have also improved on my soft or interpersonal skills and also organizational skills by setting up working hours, deadlines for the work, and scheduling meetups with my students. So in that way, it was a very diverse experience for me.
Yeah, definitely. And so much value in exposing students, youth to such real life applications, and heard that from a lot of teachers. And then when you think of it globally, it just grows the real life science having such a value to, I imagine, to your students, and what we hear from you in your presentation you delivered to Sesame. So it's great to hear that and how it influenced you. Kind of stemming off of that, so students on the Beamline is it's a team experience where there's a group, there's a science mentor, there's c.l.s. education staff helping guide through the students through their inquiry process. From your perspective as a teacher, you talked a little bit about it, but like, what was it like for you? What was your role in facilitating your students? What were some of the things that you did?
Right. So as I stated earlier, that this experience taught me how to develop students' agency in my team members, who were the stakeholders, by the way, in their learning. However, working on a novel research project for the first time necessitates guidance, support, and scaffolding. So students got constructive feedback from c.l.s. education team members, Tracy and Robert, throughout this research process. And they ensured the smooth execution of the research process. They guided the students through discussions to achieve their set goals. And I remember during one of our fortnightly meetings, Tracy and Robert suggest that we connect to a scientist who had previously conducted similar research to gain a deeper understanding of the subject matter. So initially, my team sent me an email, which I shared with the appropriate scholars, and I aided my students in gathering the necessary material on the topic of their research. We have as I have stated in my presentation too, that we have included a social component in our project. And later Tracy and Robert recommended that we connect to a local social scientist to help students learn about research ethics while developing a social survey. To that end, I once again aided my students by arranging an insightful interaction with a local researcher familiar with the country's legal requirements for addressing ethics in social surveys. And while distributing the survey for inclusivity, I facilitated once again my team in including responses from the transgender community by approaching two transgender activists. And we were fortunate that one of them responded to our request. So during the most important and I would say the crucial stage of the research process, that was the data interpretation for both the beam times and the social survey data, we received constructive feedback from Robert, Tracy, and David on how to interpret, read, and align the graphs. So to help my students become acquainted with the data handling and interpretation, I used to arrange online meetings with them. And they initially worked on the so-called practice data that we have received from c.l.s. Before working on the final data of their research. So while working on the presentation, students were also guided with the tools on how to prepare a good presentation. So I guess this was pretty much my role in facilitating my students during this research process.
Yeah, definitely is a lot of background stuff that the teacher is helping in the support of the students that isn't always brought to light in some of these experiences, but still plays a vital role. Thought of another question, so I'll just throw it at you. What did you find was the hardest thing for you as a teacher to deal with during this experience?
Right. So as this was my first ever experience connecting a team to any research environment, and specifically during the pandemic and during the lockdown situations, it was hard for me to gather at one place and prepare the sample. So making the decision where to gather and prep the samples, and before that, how to collect the samples during the lockdown situations. So we have a small window during the pandemic when they ease out the lockdowns. We just went out and we collected the samples. So this pretty much seemed to be challenging for me in decision making, where to gather as a team and prepare the samples, keeping in mind all the SOP protocols and to prepare the precise and the good samples. Yeah. Yeah,
I can definitely imagine it would be a lot, as the decision maker, like you said, to make some of those tough decisions in a pandemic, and it definitely applaud you for being able to facilitate that with your students. On the opposite side, what was the thing that you enjoyed the most as a teacher through the experience?
All right, so seeing my students taking the lead, making the decisions, and working with motivation was the coolest thing I have ever experienced while working on this project. And initially, I felt that it would be hard to accelerate the students on a track because they were not familiar to informal science experiences and informal science learning. Most of the teaching approach here in my country is sort of orthodox, where we are stick to the curriculum-based syllabus, and we don't deviate too much from that. So seeing my students taking the lead, taking their own decisions, seeing the independence that they enjoy while working on the project was the most pleasing experience for me.
That's really good to hear, and like just you get goosebumps hearing that. It's how much the students were able to just account for their own learning and really take it to themselves. So I appreciate hearing that experience, teacher to teacher. Just that's why we do it, right? So coming up to our last questions, what advice would you give to teachers in a similar position that looking to engage in a type of experience like students on the Beamlines?
the nature of a science experience and learning facilitation skills, in my opinion, are the two most essential takeaway for a teacher from the SODB program. So as an informal science experience, I engage children from various schools in SODB. So this could also be done as a science club activity, or could be dovetailed within school curriculum. So secondly, the teacher's inspiration, enthusiasm, and support for their team counts a lot for a successful completion of any project. So I would like to share at this point that during pandemic, when students were confronted with the challenges of remote learning and uncertainty of the dates of external examinations, as I have already stated in my presentation, that my team was a mix of students subjected to national and international educational framework. So one student decided to leave the project, and I encouraged, motivated, and inspired her, and I gave her some leeway in attending meetings. So overall, on teachers' part, detailed planning is essential, but make a plan flexible. So these are the core points while working with a group of young people, I think, for any teacher while engaging them into such a research journey.
Yes, definitely. What advice would you give facilities that are looking to engage in a similar experience?
All the research facilities, I think, are doing a phenomenal job in promoting science and making it accessible. I appreciate they have opened doors for the international students, and they have welcome international engagements too. So it would be wonderful if the facilities could be funded to allow international teams to participate on campus. So, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I know there's sometimes for some facilities that there seems to be more obstacles, but the people in there are just so willing and so open to provide these opportunities, and it definitely has value for them as well. So last question, what advice would you give students looking to engage in that type of experience like this?
I would advise students to partake in early research experiences like SODB, regardless of the career and academic goals they are seeking. The scientific process because allows them to develop the necessary 21st century STEM skills and life skills at large. So whether they plan on majoring in science or humanities, research experience will serve as a lens to help them see things differently with a deeper understanding. So they would become better decision makers, problem solvers, and critical thinkers. So all the skills they learn through this process, like SODB, would train them to be a confident and empowered citizen. So I would once again advise them to please engage yourself in such informal science experiences so that you will be able to participate well as informed citizen.
Yes, I heartily agree with that. That is a really good sentiment to end on, to help students see themselves as engaged citizens and informed citizens, like you said. So yeah, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to meet and to follow up with these questions. We really appreciate having your teacher perspective brought into your experience. So thank you.
Thank you so much for this opportunity once again. And I'm really obliged to c.l.s. for giving this opportunity for us. And once again, setting up this meeting for the follow-up questions. Thank you once again.
You're welcome, and we'll talk again soon.